I've been more than a little upset with Apple lately, and we're going to talk about them. What's up? I've recommended Apple because of the hardware and software, but man, lately, I don't know. So that's what we're going to talk about. Apple used to be kind of a toy operating system on its Macs. In fact, if you watch some of the videos, you've been on one of my calls, one of my trainings, etc., you might have noticed in the background that I have an original Mac, one of those cute little things. It actually still works. It still runs. And they were good, okay, but they had their limitations, that's for sure. The same thing is true, in fact, even more so, by many opinions, mine included, the same thing is true of Windows, how it was just a complete toy, right? It ran on top of DOS. You could invoke it, and then off it went, and then they came out, right? All of those other Windows versions, XP and on, just toys, absolute toys. There was no real operating system. When I say operating system, let me define it. An operating system, besides being able to run software, it provides a good interface to the hardware so that the programmers don't have to worry about accessing the hardware, which Windows has never done until recently. And it also protects programs from each other. And then arguably, the operating system allows you to have multiple users. So where does that all fall in? Well, Apple, of course, has done that more recently since 2001, and Windows is doing that. They've got their server editions, and they're kind of picking up where Unix left off in the 70s, right? Even HP, I remember running HP Access 2000F, some pretty darn cool computers back in the day, and getting on those with the teletype and using them. Those were real operating systems. IBM's operating systems, the 370 OS was just phenomenal. We were running VM CMS, and this was in the mid-70s. And it allowed multiple users. So that technology has been around for a long time, and it just kind of upsets me when you get Microsoft out there talking about how, they're the first, they developed this, it's their idea. No, it's not. It's been in the business for 40 years. Even the whole concept of virtual machines, right? Or I should say, Microsoft has recently added that in. Oh, isn't this cool? We can run virtual machines now. It's just, it's a first, industry first. No, it's not. Unix has been doing that for almost ever. IBM's been doing that since, early 70s when they started really messing around with that. So, come on, guys, get your act together. But we're talking about Apple here. I switched to using Apple probably, I think it was around 2002, because in 2001, Apple came out with what they called OS X. The last release of their operating system for the old Macs was OS 9, which again was a bit of a toy, kind of like Microsoft's operating systems of the day. And then when they came out with OS X, they made a huge shift. They switched over to a Unix underbelly. FreeBSD, macOS, just absolutely incredible stuff. And that made them now a real player out there in the operating system business. It made the potential here, at least it provided them with the potential of being far more secure than Windows of its day could ever be. Because again, Windows applications, they write directly to some of the devices, right? Oh, I'm going to the GPU. I'm going to paint this on the screen for the user. So much faster than using the operating system primitives. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. Which, of course, makes your computer much less secure. I'm just totally geeking out here, so I have to kind of apologize. I had a great geek out session with a listener, Doug, earlier this week, and it was kind of fun. So I've been a little sentimental, I guess, over the last week or two. So looking at Apple now, it has a real operating system underneath it. We could talk about all of the stuff that happened with Microsoft and bringing Cutler in, and I worked on NT 1.0 back in the day, in the operating system, that is. And there's a lot of stuff that Apple has done that just doesn't compare, thank goodness, to what Windows has done. So why am I really upset with Apple right now? Because I still recommend it. You should still be using a Mac. You should still be using an iPhone or a tablet, right, an iPad from Apple. You should never, ever be using any of the Android devices for so many reasons we've covered so many times here on the show. It's just not worthwhile because of the security side and privacy. But here's what's happened. Apple has been using this company in China for manufacturing, particularly of their iPhones, right? And there is a company over in China called Foxconn. You might have heard of that, Foxconn. It is an absolutely huge company, frankly. Taiwanese multinational. They are electronics contract manufacturer, and that is what they do. Well, Foxconn is making a lot of products for a lot of companies, including Apple. But they've done some things that are problematic, and this is where Apple comes in. Foxconn has the world's largest iPhone factory, and they have had some kind of riots lately. Think of, the old Tiananmen Square thing from some years ago where the guy was standing there and his brother was there too. But remember the guy standing there with the bags blocking the tanks from coming in. That sort of thing has happened again, including the tanks, although it's not making it onto the news so much. Man, the Chinese censors have been very busy to try and keep that out of the news. But we have been seeing some of the rioting, some of the people on strike, the demonstrations. Some areas of China have relieved themselves of this zero COVID idiocy that they've been practicing for a while. And it's at the point now where the Chinese people, some of them have just been pushing back. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, most likely, right? China, again, tries to keep a tight lid on it. And so they've relieved or removed some of these zero COVIDs in some areas because of the demonstrations. But looking at Foxconn again, think of a small campus, mostly high-rise buildings, that has 20,000 people living there. That's the size of a nice town, right? A larger town. And those people live there and work there. It reminds me of, remember the old song, I Owe My Soul to the Company Store, right? Who wrote that song? I got to look it up here because it's going to drive me crazy. Oh, yeah, Tennessee Ernie Ford, of course. So that's what's happening here. They live there, they sleep there, they watch movies there, they eat their meals there, and they work there. So they just go from floor to floor as the day goes on. Well, of that 20,000 people, it turns out that there are quite a number of Uyghurs who are there. A number of different ways to pronounce that. I'm sure I'm doing it wrong. But these are people who are under forced labor conditions. So the Chinese government has instituted slavery, although they deny it. And Foxconn is using some of those slaves, literal slaves. In this case, it's a Muslim minority that's from northwest China, more or less. Foxconn's using those people. And we are, benefiting by that. Foxconn certainly is. But if you don't have to pay somebody, if you're just feeding them and housing them, that's going to save you a whole lot of money, isn't it, in the manufacturing? Now, I am not one of those who says, we should be paying them the same wages we should be paying people in the U.S., because it takes a while for them to come up to U.S. standards, right? For the manufacturing to come up to U.S. standards, etc. But in the case of China now, they have surpassed us. I saw some photos of some of the tiny miniature screws that are used in the latest iPhone. And they compared those screws to some precision screws, the same size, same thread, made here in the US. And the article was arguing that in reality, we cannot compete with China here. We cannot make, first of all, the same quality of screws that are coming out of these Chinese factories and going into our devices, not just Apple's, but everybody's. So we can't make the same quality. It showed a very close-up, microscopic look at those different screws, the one from China that's made and used by Apple there, and the ones that are made here in the U.S. And it's the ones from China are just beautiful. The edges are just, everything's cut perfectly. There's no nastiness on it. And the one made in the U.S. is not very good. It doesn't even have the beveled head that the Chinese one does. But, we could improve. But the biggest problem is the volume. We cannot make the volume of those screws just to make iPhones. And think about everything, right? I'm picking on Apple right now, but everything made by all of these companies. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? You might remember President Trump back 2019 came out and said, hey, listen, we're opening an Apple production facility in Austin, Texas, which is true. They were taking over another factory. They're going to make Mac Pros there. So I'm going to talk about Apple's decision now and other companies about manufacturing in the U.S. Not just assembling, but manufacturing. We talked about the screw problem. Well, there's actually a whole lot more. Make sure you get my newsletter. This is in the newsletter, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. There are monetary, social, political, duty, tariff, reputational risks, your intellectual property risks that have to do with manufacturing in China. So we're going to talk about what Apple is up to right now. There are many companies now that are looking to move out of China. Those days are over. Now, I want to talk about something here from an economic standpoint as well. We are manufacturing in China because the quality is good and the price is cheap, which is part of the problem with the slave labor, right? But I am not against going to some place where the price is cheap. And here's why. Some examples here from recent decades. I think the biggest one, and maybe the best one to use, is that of India. Now, you might remember India was cheap, right? We were offshoring all kinds of projects to India. We're still offshoring a lot of tech support stuff and projects, not as much as we used to, because India is outsourcing to China. But even then, before that, we have Japan. And Japan, made in Japan, used to mean it was absolutely cheap, terrible junk that would fall apart immediately upon purchase, right? It was Japan that was sending over shiploads of I love the way this one guy had described it, but, cheap fake vomit that you'd put right in front of the fridge on the floor, right? This rubber vomit and dog poop and all of this other stuff. That was coming from from Japan. Look at Japan today. They've learned, of course, we rebuilt their factories after the war, gave them some real high-tech capabilities, far more so than we had here. But, we left them in fantastic shape from that standpoint. And they were able to grow to the point where, come mid to late 70s, early 80s, made in Japan started to mean something positive. I remember buying a Toyota because it was a great little car at the time. It was a whole lot of fun. I had a Toyota Cressida with a Supra engine in it. It was, wow, so cool for a 20-something, right? Well, the same thing happened with India. Made in India isn't necessarily as good as made in Japan right now, but it probably will be. And same thing with China. China used to be the cheap place to go, right? Where'd you buy from China? Well, you got those little umbrellas that you put in drinks, right? That back in the day. Now you get quality products out of China. But there are a lot of problems with manufacturing in China. I mentioned those here in the opening. the monetary problems, social, political, duty, tariffs, reputation, your intellectual property potentially being stolen. And all of those have been increasing a lot. Plus now the cost of manufacturing has gone up. So we are in the process of raising the standard of living in China. Of course, the biggest problem is that China is run by socialists. And those socialists want to control every aspect of their lives. It's a typical thing socialist leftists do, right? That's what they're up to. And so the people in that country are not benefiting as much as they could be. Because if you compare, again, the quality of what they're making to the cost, the cost is too low. That iPhone should not cost you $1,000. I saw a really great little breakdown saying, if it was made in the U.S., it'd probably be $1,600 to $2,000. And that's what should be happening in China. Of course, the socialists are stopping that from happening, right? They're keeping people under their thumb, and they're using some slave labor, which is a real problem in my eye. So that's where I've really kind of drawn the line with Apple lately. It's, you guys, you're doing this in China. It's hurting us. It's hurting our reputation. You are making some of this stuff, including chips there in Taiwan, which is very, very dangerous. Big strike, in fact, at Foxconn's workers in Taiwan, the company called Jiangsu, which is a factory. They walked out over a pay dispute with the company. Now, of course, you don't have the amount of socialism in Taiwan that you do over in China. And if you want to look at the fastest growing and most incredible, it's Singapore, which is totally free trade. It's just incredible how that's been growing over there. But this one factory is estimated to account for more than 70% of Apple's global assembly of iPhones. So if your supplier that supplies you with 70% of your products goes out on strike, or the other problem that they've been having in Taiwan is a major water shortage, and you need a lot of water in order to make chips. The chips that are in all of our devices nowadays. The average car has 100 plus chips in it. It's just incredible, little computers. So what should you do? Well, a lot of companies have really started to smarten up. They finally realize, wait a minute now, getting everything from one company may not be the best idea ever. Where did that come from? Well, that actually came from Japan and the whole idea of just-in-time inventory. And I remember studying that and how great it was back in the 70s in college. And man, it's just, they're going to take over the world. China's going to own the whole world. Of course, they've been in a severe economic slump for over 20 years now. But just-in-time inventory is all well and good, and it's kind of cool, a good way to do it when the technology is changing on an almost daily basis, right? You don't want to have a warehouse full of stuff, but you also want to have something that you can sell. You want to be able to have some money, right? If you don't have any income as a business, you don't have a business, and people lose their jobs. A real problem. So Apple now is planning to move out of China. That is huge. Now, China, again, this is not an economics course, but China has been really kind of hurting lately with some of their lack of population growth, because they've been building all of these ghost cities. I just saw a thing where they were blowing up some of these high rises that had been built and never occupied. It just, wow, okay. So what do you think is going to end up happening when we move our stuff out? Right? I think what's going to end up happening is that China's going to be hurting even more. It may push them over the edge. But our friends, again, over at Apple have said, no, we are not going to be putting up with that. We are not going to do it. So I think that's pretty darn cool. They're moving on out. So we'll see what happens. Apple really accelerated their plans over the last weeks and months here to shift some of its production outside of China. They are moving it to other places in Asia, particularly India, which, as I mentioned earlier, has really moved ahead in its ability to produce high tech and have just brilliant people there, right? They're now given that opportunity. Also, Vietnam, which has been really progressing, right? It used to be they made some textiles. Now Vietnam and some other of these countries in Indonesia, etc., are making high-tech disk drives and other things. You might remember just a few years ago, we had a big shortage of hard disk drives because there was a big flood that happened down there and they couldn't manufacture. So they are moving manufacturing, Apple and other companies, out of China. And I love to see this. Again, India, it's going to help those people there so much. Vietnam, the same thing. And I really wish we would do more here, but there's good news there too. That Taiwanese company I was talking about, TMC, that makes so many of the chips, they are building the highest tech chip plant in the world right here in the USA. 3 nanometer technology. Wow, this is going to be cool. So finally, the world is waking up and China is getting a black eye. Now, what does that mean? Well, we'll leave it to the politicians, but I'm sure it won't mean good things. Make sure you're on my email list, craigpeterson.com, so you get all of this news as soon as it's available. Well, we've got another warning here for Android users, and this one has to do with VPN apps. Now, are any VPN apps legitimate? We could argue that. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but these ones, they are not. This was in my newsletter from a website called WeLiveSecurity.com. They've got a lot of great articles on there. But I love this headline because it's the truth. Malicious apps used in this active campaign are exfiltrating contacts, SMS messages, recorded phone calls, and even chat messages from apps such as Signal, Viber, and Telegram. Signal is the private messaging app that I recommend. It's free. It's available for pretty much every platform out there, and it is quite secure. Many other companies use Signal as the basis for their communication so that they can have that type of end-to-end security. Telegram, no, not so good. I've never used Viber, never investigated it, so I can't tell you much about Viber. But here's what's going on. There is a group out there called the Bahamut Group, and they have been active since January 2022, and they are distributing malicious apps through a fake website. Now, these apps are purported to be VPN apps and are legitimate VPN apps. Again, you probably know what my gripes are with these VPNs that are out there, VPN services, that is, that they're just bad news for so many people, so many ways. Don't use them. But this is a website that pretends to be secure VPN. And they have another one that's pretending to be OpenVPN, which is something that I've used before for point-to-point communications, that is. So these are kind of what you might call side-loaded apps. And man, is there a huge discussion over this one. The European Union, for instance, wants Apple to open up their architecture so people can install apps from any vendor. And Apple makes a lot of money because of its App Store. Vendors on the App Store are paying 20 or 30% of the money that you are paying for an app. Apple's keeping 20 to 30% of that money. Now, okay, they've developed a great ecosystem. They've got a good product, and that's why people are using it. So why shouldn't companies that are selling apps pay something in the form of royalties, really, to Apple? I think they should. But the European Union says, okay, that's fine, but they should not be limited to just Apple. The reason I bring that up is because of this whole concept of sideloading. You see, neither one of those pieces of spyware were distributed via the Google Play Store. Google Play, they weren't available. You got the legitimate ones if you went to the Google Play Store. But because of the fact that people were downloading these apps from the fake websites, a fake soft VPN site and a fake open VPN site, and installing them on their Android device, now all of a sudden they lost all of their, potentially anyways, their contacts, all of their text messages, their recorded phone calls, chat messages, even from secure apps. That's a very, very big deal. So the app is a Trojanized version of either soft VPN or open VPN. They repackaged it with this Bahamut spyware code that they've used in the past. And the investigation showed at least 8 versions of these maliciously patched apps with these code changes and updates that are available through their distribution website. So that means that this campaign is well maintained. And the main purpose of these app modifications is to extract sensitive user data and actively spy on the victim's messaging apps. Isn't that something here? So once the spyware is launched, it requests an activation key before the VPN and spyware functionality can be enabled. So both the activation key and the website link are sent to targeted users. This is why I am not quite on the fence about whether or not Apple should open up its ecosystem to anybody. See, I'm not on the fence. I think people should know, hey guys, if you're not buying it from the Apple store, you are potentially in for a load of problems. Now, just because you get it on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store does not mean that that app is guaranteed to be safe. No, not at all. Both companies, both Google and Apple, use some programs to scan through the apps that are submitted to try and figure out, is this app legitimate or are they doing something they shouldn't be? And it catches probably the vast majority of all of those, but it doesn't catch all of them. So if you now have the European Union forcing Apple to open up its architecture so that applications can be loaded into the iPhone that are not vetted by Apple, then what? What's going to end up happening? Well, this sort of thing is going to end up happening because people are going to say, oh, why should I pay for that in the App Store? Here, it's free over here. And yet, that is a piece of nasty spyware. Now, both Android and Apple iOS, the iPhone operating system, have some stuff in place to help to wall off the applications from each other so that they can't do as much malicious stuff. But, you know, if applications can't talk to each other or can't share certain data, you're going to lose functionality. So they have to be able to share some things and see some things. Pretty big deal, right? So be very, very careful with this because these guys are masters in phishing. And there's an investigative journalism group called Bellingcat that is, is out there, is trying to do this. So I don't know. Don't use Android, period. If you're going to use Android, only get apps from the Google Play Store because you're going to be safer. And as far as Apple completely opening up, well, I see it on the one side, right? Do you own that phone? Should you be allowed to put whatever software you want on it? Well, yeah. How about the next step? Should you be able to just grab any software from anywhere? And what if it's malicious? Are you going to try and go after Apple? Because it's not Apple's fault that this software is terribly malicious. Okay? There are a lot of problems that are going to have to be addressed. So what Apple has done on their operating system for quite a while now is they have signatures on apps for Mac OS, as well as obviously for iOS. Microsoft has once again followed Apple's lead and also has signed applications. They did it a bit of a different way, but it does help to prove legitimacy, at least where did it come from, which solves that biggest problem, which is who's liable. So if it's a signed application, you can at least figure out who it was ultimately, because someone had to sign up with Google or Apple, and I am signed up as a developer with both of those, and then I have to pay, right? It's $100, give or take, depends who, right? And I pay with a credit card or a debit card, and those cards are traceable ultimately back to me. So we've still got a lot of things to answer for here. Be very, very careful. I'm not a VPN fan. I've got a great little webinar I did on that. But this is particularly bad. Do not sideload apps. Only run apps that are from the official app stores. And if you have a question, you can just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. It's that simple, craigpeterson.com. We've got a bit of information here on telephone spoofing. This is a scam that one of the perpetrators was just caught. They had taken $100 million plus from people. So we're going to talk about how to avoid these phone scams. I've had caller ID for quite a while. You might remember back in the day, what was it? You dialed *69, was it, to call back the last person that called you? It wasn't telling you who it was who was calling you, but it just let you call them back. It's kind of cool, but that's also kind of old. Nowadays, we have caller ID. You notice how it kind of went downhill with cell phones? Because caller ID on a landline phone used to give the phone number and the name of the person that was calling, right? Or at least the name associated with that phone number. When cell phones came around, yeah, it'd show you the number that was calling, but wouldn't tell you who it is. There was different caller ID information embedded in that. And if you have that person in your contacts, it'll look up the phone number and show you the name that's in your contacts, which I guess is okay. But there is a lot that can be done to fool you, and it's called spoofing. It's where they are pretending to be someone else. And there is a guy who was just arrested. This is quite an interesting article, again, in the newsletter, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. But they grabbed a domain called ispoof.cc. The government did, the police did, right? And what they had was a service at iSpoof that allowed you to pay via Bitcoin in order to make phone calls with any caller ID that they wanted. How's that for a great way to do it, right? And I've had that ability for a very long time. It is frankly not that difficult. They are cracking down on it, and because of that, they've made my life, my legitimate life, a little bit harder. But, just a few people ruin it for the rest of us, right? So in this case, they did it a little differently. They did seize the domain, but usually what will happen is the domain gets seized. The bad guys notice, wait a minute, our domain got seized, run, and then they go and they start their operation somewhere else, particularly when we're talking about the dark web, because so much of the dark web is so difficult to track down. So they would seize the domain and, get on top of the building and start crowing, look at what a great job the police did. But they didn't catch the bad guys. That's not what happened this time. They did it the right order anyways. So here's what they did. This is from the press release. Judicial and law enforcement authorities in Europe, Australia, the United States, Ukraine, and Canada have taken down a website that allowed fraudsters to impersonate trusted corporations or contacts to access sensitive information from victims, a type of cybercrime known as spoofing. But you guys knew that, right? The website is believed to have caused an estimated worldwide loss in excess of 100 million pounds sterling, which of course is over 100 million US dollars. In a coordinated action led by the United Kingdom and supported by Europol and Eurojust, 142 suspects have been arrested, including the main administrator of the website. Now, this alleged ringleader is a 34-year-old guy by the name of TJ Fletcher. And, of course, he's in custody there by the police. He's going to appear in court, and I'm sure it'll go on and on and on. But the bottom line is you cannot trust what it says on the caller ID. So here's what to do. Some great tips here from Naked Security. Tip 1, treat the caller ID as nothing more than a hint. That is so important, okay? And this is a good way to avoid the scam. Okay, it says it's so-and-so calling. It might be, it might not be. But the caller's number that shows up on your phone before you answer proves nothing, okay? Those caller ID numbers are nothing better than really a vague hint that it might be that person or company. So if the phone rings and the names that are associated with it are your bank's name here, right? Remember that those words that pop up come from your own contact list. So you might have TD Bank, for instance, in your contacts with TD Bank's phone number, and these bad guys could use iSpoof or so many other ways to do it, as I just indicated. And now they're calling with a caller ID of, in this case, we'll say TD Bank, and then TD Bank's number is looked up in your contacts and it says, yeah, it's TD Bank calling. Oh, okay. Well, I better answer it, okay? So be very careful. Just look at it this way, that the caller ID number coming in provides no more proof than the subject line of an email, right? How many times have you opened an email based on the subject line and just said, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing that, right? They did that to me again. Tip number 2. Always initiate official calls yourself and use a number you can trust. So if you genuinely need to contact an organization like your bank by phone, make sure that you initiate the call and use a number that worked out for you previously, okay? So you might want to look at an official bank statement. You got to be careful. Even, you go to even Google, right, that so many people use, can be poisoned is what it's called, so that Google will show you the wrong information. That happened to my dad. He was looking for Microsoft tech support, and he ended up with some scammers that were downloading his spreadsheet that had all of his passwords in it. Don't do that. Use onepassword.com, okay, everybody? So be careful. Look at the bank statement. Double check everything. I hate to have to say this stuff, right? Because my gosh, these people, there's some really bad people out there. Tip 3, don't let a coincidence convince you the call is genuine, okay? So don't assume the call must be from the bank because you had some problems with the bank, right? The credit card didn't work. You were on the internet this morning. You couldn't log into your bank account. Right? That's a coincidence. That doesn't mean it's legit. So iSpoof scammers made at least 3.5 million calls in the UK alone and 6.5 million elsewhere, including the US, over a 1-year period. So that means the scammers were placing an average of one call every 3 seconds at the most likely times a day for people to answer. So coincidences aren't merely possible. Frankly, they're kind of inevitable here, right? They're doing a lot of work because the bottom line is, according to the numbers that were released by the FBI and Interpol, these guys were getting an average of over $10,000 each out of a few thousand people. Isn't that something? Number 4, make sure your friends and family that you think might be vulnerable to some sweet talker or maybe browbeaten, confused, intimidated by scammers know that they can and should turn to you for help. You are the best and brightest. You are likely somebody's tech support, right? Make sure they know they can reach out to you. So in the case of my dad, where he thought he was calling Microsoft because he did a Google search for Microsoft tech support, my stepmother noticed what he was doing and called me. Very, very important. You guys are many times the last line of defense, because once that money's gone, the odds they'll get any of it back are almost zero. Think of it like cryptocurrencies, right? At some of these exchanges. Yeah, we're not giving you your money back. Yeah. It's not worth anything anymore. Yeah. Thanks for putting your wallet with us. So this is an interesting problem, a hard one to solve, because so many of us are so trusting here in the U.S. and abroad. And our family members who are older, who are most likely to fall for this sort of a scam, don't have a whole lot of technical prowess, but they also are far more trusting. And I would rather see a country of people who are trusting. So have them trust and yet verify by calling you. Okay, let them know that. Absolutely let them know that. This is amazing here. This is a company called Pushwish. Now, the United States government bundled mobile apps for the United States Army and for the Centers for Disease Control with Pushwish. Pushwish was claiming to be, we're a U.S. site here. We're in Kensington, Maryland. You got to trust us. Turns out, no. It is a Russian company that was sending all of the visitor data over to Russia. Interesting, eh? Yeah, so they're a little digging in. Krebs on Security had a good article that I sent out as part of my newsletter. But he's talking about how the Army told Reuters that it removed this app containing Pushwish, citing security concerns. And the Army app was used by soldiers at one of the nation's main combat training bases. CDC removed Pushwish from its code. From its code here in its app over security concerns as well. So it was operated from Novosibirsk, I guess is it how you might pronounce it in Russia. That's how I'd pronounce it, right? But it's a real problem here. We got to be careful. The British Labour Party was using it. Unilever, apparently. European Football Association, the National Rifle Association. It goes on and on. These companies that were using it, they were conned. All right, so a big problem. Be very, very careful. Hey, I think one of the best ways I can help you is by just going ahead and telling you what's up, when it's going to happen, okay? So you got to subscribe. I don't know how else to say this. Make sure you are on my email list. I do free trainings. I do all kinds of different things to help you guys out. I have, of course, services for businesses, right? That's how I can spend this time with you every week. So I appreciate my customers out there. But I'm not going to harass you, right? This isn't an internet marketing organization. I want to help. So take a minute right now. Go to CraigPeterson.com. That's Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Peterson, P-E-T-E-R-S-O-N.com. CraigPeterson.com/subscribe. And you'll get this from me every week. All of the latest and what you need to know and do. Take care.